Environmental justice activist Sarah Smiley joins us to discuss climate change and the politics of fossil fuels around the country, this week on The Feminist Perspective.
The Feminist Perspective with Dr. Sophia Johnson is made possible by Hollingsworth Real Estate Group. Ask Hollingsworth about real estate. And by Allstate. You're in good hands.
We have mothers coming together to work on green transit and specifically ensuring that we are moving from dirty buses to electric buses, both for municipal systems and school buses. We have mothers who are working to stop new fossil fuel infrastructure projects like compressor stations and pipelines.
I think that the world is changing in ways that are very concrete as a result of Mothers Out Front in a way that it wouldn't be otherwise. You know, when moms show up at a city council hearing and they're, asking a politician or a group of people to make a decision and it works, like that wouldn't have happened if those moms hadn't shown up.
Sarah Smiley is a volunteer leader of the Westchester Rivertown's team of Mothers Out Front, a nonprofit environmental group with 42 teams in 10 states across the country. The project is focused on raising awareness about climate impacts, and their mission is to move decision makers to take action that will ensure a healthy environment for all children. Since 2013, Mothers Out Front has been focusing resources in historically marginalized communities adversely affected by climate change and fossil fuel use. Sarah Smiley has been at the helm of this national movement. She's based in Sleepy Hollow, New York, where the team is focused on opposing gas in new construction and advocating for electric school buses. Sarah Smiley, welcome to The Feminist Perspective.
Thank you so much. I'm really honored to be here representing Mothers Out Front.
Yes. So let's talk a little bit about Mothers Out Front. What is Mothers Out Front? How did it come about? And how did you become involved in this project?
Sure. So it started in 2013 in Boston. Two women, Vanessa Rule and Kelsey Worth, happened to meet each other. They were both going through turmoil about the climate crisis and feeling that nothing was happening fast enough to stop it. So they joined forces and decided that moms were in a perfect position to rally around this cause. And they started just having house parties and talking to more moms and having these conversations and organizing and training and giving these opportunities to develop leadership and skills among women in the community. And they started tackling the gas infrastructure issue in Massachusetts. And I got involved a couple of years ago. I moved to Westchester from New York City. I had a baby at the time, and I went to a rally in Peekskill, and I was holding my baby with me, and I saw another woman there holding a Mothers Out Front sign, and she came over and introduced herself, and we became friends, and I helped her start a chapter.
Very nice. So tell me, what is the biggest, you say that this project emerged out of a crisis that was identified in Boston. What is the biggest national crisis in this space?
I mean, the climate crisis is so huge, and the Mothers Out Front recognizes that it's, as science has pointed out to us, that it's fossil fuels that is driving the climate crisis, and we need a dramatic transformation of our energy system. We need to transition our communities off fossil fuels to renewable energy, and a large part of that is through a process of electrification. So we convert to electricity and make sure that electricity is generated by renewable sources. So that's sort of the goal that Mothers Out Front is working toward, along with many other ally organizations. So I think that's the main challenge that has to be overcome nationwide. And from a more I guess, philosophical point of view, what the challenge is, it's getting people to understand that they can do something about the challenge, the crisis, and overcoming this idea that it's not really happening, which some people still seem to think, and that it's something that we have to take action on right now, and that it's critical, and we have a very limited amount of time to do something about it.
So what, I think for many people, the reason why it feels like, well, maybe this thing's not, it's overwhelming. I don't even know what to recycle because I don't even know where to begin. I'm like, it's plastic. Let me just, and that really is not the right approach. I think we have to be strategic and we have to be very disciplined about recycling, for example. But it seems like so big. How can you help viewers understand what to do. Where do I begin if I'm a homeowner living in Sleepy Hollow or another town in Westchester County? What can I do in my home today if I don't have money to make the gigantic leap in terms of transitioning from fossil fuel use? What do I do? Where do I begin?
Well, just in the few examples you gave, there are a lot of different ways that people are tackling climate change, and it can feel overwhelming. And people often start with, as you said, what they personally can do in their own home.
Right.
And that's important, personal choices, and creates a mind shift in how you view every choice you make in life, what you're buying and how you're powering your home.
Yeah.
And recycling is really important. I think there's, there's no, off the top of my head, there's no easy checklist that someone can say, okay, well, I do this, this, and this, and then I've checked off the climate crisis in my household and I'm done. But I think it often starts with, because people see like the amount of waste that they accumulate in their home. So I think in terms of volunteers that come to our team, that's often the place where they're starting from, is they see in their own house how they're contributing to the climate crisis. And so they often want to tackle those problems first because it feels so tangible. And those are really important things, in terms of buying less, less disposable things, transitioning to reusable containers and not getting bottled water, composting instead of throwing out your food scraps. All those things are really important. But I think the key thing that people should take away from this is that they have to be part of a civic conversation. What policies are going on at the local level, because that people really have so much more power than they are aware of to have a big impact. Because nothing is happening at the federal level, people think, well, there's nothing we can really do about it.
Right.
And it's true, we really have very little power at the federal level. Like I can't, make a big change in Congress right now, and have legislation pass. But on the local level, if I go to my village board meeting and say, did you know that, gas is having a really horrible effect on our climate, and it's also really bad for our air quality. And we shouldn't be building with gas anymore. And these are the policies that we can implement. People really have a lot of power at the local level to say those things and to make a difference. And that's what community teams are doing here in New York and nationwide with Mothers Out Front and other groups. But it's important for people to sort of just go beyond the very personal, I think, and to collaborate with other people who feel the same way, because that's how you build change. It's not just on your own. You can't do so much on your own, you have to work with other people.
Yeah, for sure. This is a perfect segue into my next question, which I wanted to spend a few minutes talking a little bit about the recent energy efficiency report card, and specifically what New York is doing really well, or even more specific, what Westchester County has got right, and what some areas that we need to spend a little bit more time on.
Sure. So I think there's a lot more to be done. Energy efficiency will take us a long way toward meeting our clean energy goals, because even if the idea is you want to use less energy to begin with, and then you power what you use with renewable energy, but you want to reduce the overall amount that we're using. Our team hasn't delved into the specifics yet of how we can go about that. But a lot of organizations do look at this, and there are different technologies that can be advocated for. For example, as I mentioned before, natural gas, there are all sorts of problems associated with that, and it's also not as efficient as different technologies.
Let's talk a little bit about something you brought up about a minute ago, natural gas. I think there's a lot of miseducation about the value of natural gas by virtue of it having the name natural gas.
Right.
Let's talk a little bit about why that is so bad. I think the public needs to be educated as to why this natural gas is not a natural best option for their homes or for their businesses.
Right. I mean, natural gas, that's, industry coined that term to make it seem like this clean alternative to coal, essentially. Yeah. And it was long promoted as this bridge fuel that would get us off coal before we could fully transition to renewable energy. And what we know that now, though, is that methane from natural gas traps heat in the atmosphere at a much higher potency than carbon dioxide. So it's a much stronger greenhouse gas for heating the planet. So we've been increasing dramatically the amount of gas we're using, and that has accelerated the heating of our planet, which is accelerating climate change.
Right.
And so on top of the danger to the climate that it poses, there's a lot of health risks that it creates.
For example?
So the indoor air quality in your home is at risk. When you cook with gas, that actually releases, I think, nitrogen dioxide at higher levels than the EPA says is safe. So we're putting toxins into our homes as a result of this.
Right.
There's also the whole extraction process for natural gas, which can contaminate groundwater. Fracking is how they now extract gas.
Yeah.
And that has, poisoned water and caused a lot of harm to the air quality in those communities.
Right.
So people are really suffering in a direct way when we use gas in our homes.
Yeah.
And there's the risk of explosions with gas as well, just to top it all off.
No, it's dreadful. So where is New York State with fracking right now, and where's New York State with natural gas use? I know that I received a letter a few months ago in my home about a moratorium on making the transition from heating oil to natural gas. Where are we in terms of legislation?
So I believe it was in 2015 that fracking was banned in New York State. And I just want to point out that wasn't sort of an out of the blue. The governor just thought that was a good idea. Advocates had been working for years to convey the dangers of fracking, and so that finally was banned. The problem is we import fracked gas from Pennsylvania.
Oh.
So it's, yes, we're not fracking here, but we're
fracking everywhere.
We're fracking everywhere else, and we're basically creating a market for fracking elsewhere, and it's hurting those communities. And the infrastructure to transport that fracked gas continues to be built out, and so teams around the state and all these other organizations have to constantly fight against that build out of infrastructure.
Yeah.
And the moratorium that you referenced, so that has happened in Westchester, which kind of caused a big hullabaloo, elected officials and developers saying, we can't get gas, this is terrible.
Yeah.
And it's kind of creating this sense of crisis that we might need more pipelines to bring in gas.
Oh.
Where the reality is we don't need the gas to come in.
Yeah.
We need to be pushing alternatives that are already available.
Right. So that's where we are.
That's where we are.
But it sounds like Pennsylvania business is booming.
The fracking business? Yes. And
because of the New York demand, right?
Right, that's correct. I'd say you could say it's booming, and you could also say it's really divided communities, is my impression of it. I haven't actually visited those communities, but I've heard someone speak who came to a Mothers Out Front meeting in Boston, and she just shared the stories of its impact on her family, the health impacts, and it's really heartbreaking.
Oh, yeah.
And Mothers Out Front has this whole regional gas initiative, so they've visited Pennsylvania, they've talked to the families there, and they're really getting insight into the danger that the whole industry creates.
Right. This is helpful. Let's talk a lot bit about some local campaigns in Westchester and Sleepy Hollow in particular. The Sleepy Hollow, in Sleepy Hollow, the Westchester, the Rivertowns team is focused on two things: advocating for electric buses, but also focusing on.
Right. Well, there's this large new development happening in Sleepy Hollow. It's called Edge on Hudson, and it's at the old GM site right on the Hudson River. And it's been in the works for a really long time, like 20 years. The village has been waiting for this to happen.
Right.
And it's going to have lots of multifamily buildings, condos, townhouses, and a hotel and different things.
Yeah.
And it occurred to us on the team that we're not really looking at what is the environmental impact of this project in terms of how is it going to increase our carbon footprint as a village, and what is the developer seeking alternatives to using gas.
Right.
And so we've started to having these conversations and bringing it to light that this is an issue and that we need to be pushing for more. We shouldn't, whatever we build is going to be there for decades, and our children will feel the impact of it.
Right.
So we have to demand that we are doing everything we can to prevent more fossil fuels from being added to our atmosphere. I mean, it's critical that we take every step we can. So that's one, because it's such a huge development.
Right.
That's why we're focused on that. And it's not clear how it's going to turn out, but we want to at least make sure people are aware that it's an issue, because a lot of people don't know that gas is a problem.
Yeah.
I think that's true. They know coal is bad, but they always thought gas was kind of clean and good. And,
no, this is true.
And that's not the case, and people need to know that.
Let's talk a little bit about the electric bus campaign.
Sure. So that's a national campaign with Mothers Out Front. So teams across the country are working on that. Transportation is now the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions nationwide. And school buses are like 25% of transportation emissions across the country. So it's transitioning from diesel, which is very polluting, to electric buses, which has zero tailpipe emissions, would have a great benefit in terms of reducing those greenhouse gas emissions. And there's also a huge health benefit. For our children riding on those buses, the diesel buses, are breathing in those fumes.
Yeah, for sure.
And that has really contributes to respiratory illness. It can cause cancer. There are all sorts of really bad things associated with it.
Yeah.
And Mothers Out Front has partnered with an organization, Green for All and Clean Energy Works, which has financing models, because the major challenge for school districts is the upfront cost for an electric school bus versus a diesel.
Right.
But there are ways that you can work with utility companies to come up with a financing arrangement to pay for that premium cost.
Yeah.
And there's just an announcement in Virginia. There's a Mothers Out Front team there, and they are working with the school districts and Dominion Energy, the utility company, and they are going to be introducing a fleet of electric school buses.
Right.
So that's really exciting, and we're seeing that momentum build across the country.
Nice. So we have 42 teams, 10 states. What has been the legislative impact of Mothers Out Front in terms of advocacy? Where have you had major inroads?
Well, I'll give an example from a New York team. Because we're talking about gas.
Sure.
So there's a Cayuga power plant in the Ithaca Lansing area of New York State. It was a coal plant, and they wanted to repower it with natural gas. A group of moms with Mothers Out Front there, along with other local activists, knew that this was a terrible idea.
Yeah.
So they petitioned their town board, their county legislature, and they showed up at hearings. They met with the legislators, and they got their county legislature to pass a resolution to send to Governor Cuomo saying that this cannot happen. We cannot have this repowered with gas. And so now the power company has said that they're not going to do it, and instead they're turning it into a data center and powered in part with solar energy. But as with a lot of these cases, they can't just sit back and say, okay, everything's great now. There's still a chance that the power plant will use it for natural gas. So they're now petitioning the governor, these teams in Lansing, to get them to fully decommission the plant so that can't happen. So there's a need for constant vigilance. But that was also just a huge victory.
Wow, that's pretty good. Considering that Mothers Out Front has not been on the scene for such a long time, the impact has been significant, I think.
Yes, and especially, the work that they've done in Boston, which is where it all started, was really huge. They've focused on gas leaks and really brought to light this danger that was everywhere. And they went around tagging the gas leaks. They got media to focus on it. They had kids out there tagging these gas leaks, and they talked to all their local legislatures around the state, and it turned into a statewide victory where they passed a bill at the state level requiring that the utility fix the gas leaks.
Yeah.
And they've entered into a whole different dialogue with the utility over it, where they're now trying to get them to change the business model, where instead of putting in gas lines, you can put in geothermal lines.
Yeah.
So it's this whole new way of thinking about our sources of energy.
Yeah.
And there are ways with what's called district heating,
What is
where
that?
it's where you essentially put in a ground source or geothermal heat pump loop, where many buildings can feed into it.
So do we have samples of where that has been successful? Why is this a viable option?
It has been. It definitely has been done. It's with like on campus situations with multiple buildings tying into it. So what they're looking to do in Massachusetts is do a pilot in like one neighborhood.
Oh, I see.
To see how they can do that.
Yeah.
But it could create a much more equitable system where not everyone can afford the upfront cost of doing geothermal in their home if they're on gas.
Yeah.
If you do something where the whole community can benefit from the installation, it's something, obviously we want clean energy available to everybody, not just those who can afford that kind of cost, right? So that's sort of the goal, and that's the kind of new way of thinking about it that we're trying to introduce and tell our local officials about, because they really have the power to have those conversations and move in that direction.
What's going on in DC? Where are we? Are we going forward? Are we going backward? What's your take on DC politics and climate change?
I mean, from the administration level,
well, just from
I mean, I think
federal versus,
I mean, I think it
doesn't have to be specific to the administration, but it is
right. I mean, I think it's pretty frightening what's happening at the federal level. And I mean, this is just my personal opinion. I'm not speaking for the organization, but I think the Green New Deal is really exciting.
Yeah.
But there's so much damage that's being done with rollbacks of regulations that, and going into federal national parks and trying to open up new areas for drilling. It's really trying to move us backward. And when everyone else, we should be a leader globally in terms of moving forward with this transition to clean energy, and that's not happening right now at the federal level. But which is why having local efforts is so important.
Yeah.
And you really can have influence, and you can have a huge impact too. Berkeley, California just passed a law saying no gas for new construction, new residential construction.
Okay.
And I believe lots of other cities in California are also looking at that type of legislation. So that's a type of thinking and vision that we need.
Yeah.
And we have to push our leaders to have that kind of vision at a local level, because that can really add up to huge impact.
Now, in this particular political climate, how do you protest for change? What does protest or activism look like? It feels like when I was looking at social engagement and activism 20 years ago, it feels like we have to do things a little bit differently today. Maybe in theory it would have worked a particular way with the pickets. It feels like it has to be like a multi-disciplinary approach, or just tapping multiple areas. What's your take on what makes for effective social engagement and effective activism for Mothers Out Front?
Well, there are still, holding signs. That's still part of it, and getting out there and being visible.
Yeah.
But you're right. It takes a lot of different channels, I think. And for starters, it really begins with the one-on-one engagement.
Yeah.
And getting community members on board. I think that's really where Mothers Out Front has a lot of strength. And because it really is relationship-based. And it's also about building leadership.
Yeah.
When you gain the experience of speaking up for the first time, and having a meeting with your elected official, or giving comments during a public hearing, you realize, I can actually do something. And once you realize that you have some power, and there's this feeling, well, I can't stop doing that now because this is a real problem that we need to address, and I can actually do something about it.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of it, is just engaging community members and empowering them and building leadership. And it's also a great way to build community.
Yeah.
You know, like I think I've gained such strong friendships through the result of being on this community team.
Nice.
That's been really rewarding.
Yeah.
But it also takes, strategic thinking, and who do you need to talk to? Who is the decision maker on a particular policy or fossil fuel infrastructure that you're tackling? Like, who will make the decision and who can influence that person? So it's a lot of meeting with people. It's social media engagement now is obviously huge.
Sure, that's what I was thinking.
And being creative and finding new ways to get people's attention. People are like really busy and have a lot of things pulling at them. So trying to find ways to engage people and also stories that they can connect with and make it personal to them.
Right.
This is really about like the health of our community and their own children.
Yeah.
So people want to, be part of something that's positive.
Yeah.
So I think that's a big part of it.
Nice. Finally, it just occurred to me, and I didn't have a question on this, but you talked a few minutes ago, about 10 minutes ago, about the impact that diesel fuel, for example, have on the health of children riding these buses. Is there any data on the health impacts of climate change and fossil fuel use on children? Do we have any data? I mean, Mothers Out Front is centrally focused on these moms saying, listen, we're going to protect our environment for the sake of our children. Is there any data that you've gathered over time on its impact?
I don't know if there's data over the impact of climate change in general. There's definitely data that's been used specifically related to what are the impacts of gas leaks, for example.
Yeah.
So
and
for
what is the impact?
I don't know the specifics offhand.
Yeah.
It's all air pollution, respiratory effects. These toxins that we're breathing in.
Yeah.
For diesel fumes, that can affect. There's been a study that it can affect learning ability in children.
Yeah, for sure.
So that type of data for like specific issues is definitely prevalent. And then for the climate change evidence in general, I mean, I think we see every day the impact of climate change and how it's posing a grave risk, whether it's, fires or floods or storms, and people are actually dying from it. So for the greater cause, I think there's proof of that that people can point to.
Yeah, it also feels like the work you're doing on some other level, it's good for the earth, it's good for people, but it's also it seems to it's morally, it makes sense. It's a moral. It's like, where's your moral compass on this? It feels like a very almost a spiritual work that you're doing, working on behalf of the earth, the children, the people, the plants, the trees. You're sort of doing something that's more meaningful.
Yeah,
Would you agree?
I do agree. I mean, I think of it as it's for our own. It's our survival depends on it, and it's so, and also, the activist Greta Thunberg from Sweden.
Yes.
She's a 6-year-old who's came over by boat.
Yeah, for sure.
And she's led these student strikes, right, that have taken off around the world.
Yeah.
They're having these huge strikes on September 20th.
Yeah.
And she's the one, I think she said, like, our house is on fire, you have to do something.
Yeah.
And there's no other, how can we say to our children, yes, we knew this horrible thing is happening and we just decided your generation would take care of it.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't do that for any other issue affecting our own children, right?
Yeah.
So as you said, I think it's a moral responsibility that we have to take this on.
Yeah.
And the benefit to taking it on, aside from our continued existence, is the world will be a much better place, right? I mean, imagine there are no compressor stations in low-income neighborhoods. There's no pipelines going through someone's community. The reduced air pollution. People can breathe better. You'd have clean drinking water. You'd have better food. I mean, and a whole new industry for clean energy.
Yeah,
so
for
it's
sure.
The impacts will be wide-ranging and really positive if we really tackle it with the urgency that we need to.
Yeah. Sarah Smiley, it was really so nice speaking with you. Thank you for coming to the Feminist
for having me.
Perspective.
Thank you
and
very
I really
much.
hope that more can be done for all our sakes.
Yes, thank you so much.